and welcome to Being the Church in a Time of Crisis. This is our 15th online gathering for congregational leaders sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I am Jill Beverlin. I'm the coordinator of coaching for the ELCA and one of your facilitators today. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, our ministry has been creating this weekly space for leaders to gather. In our time together, we explore different topics. We struggle with our role and call in this particular time, and we seek to discern what our next faithful steps might be. Above all, it is important to note that this is meant to be a safe and brave space for each of us to bring the truth of who we are and how we are doing in this time. Extra framing is called for as we begin. As part of the 2019 ELCA Churchwide Assembly, voting members adopted a resolution designating June 17th as a commemoration of the martyrdom of the Emmanuel Nine. The 9 people shot and killed on June 17th, 2015, during a Bible study at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. As Lutherans, we acknowledge with additional pain that of these 9 people that were killed, 2 were graduates of Lutheran Southern Seminary. We typically talk about grief and hope in this space on Wednesdays. As we commemorate the Emmanuel Nine, we add the necessary call of lament and accountability today. Lament for the 9 Black lives lost, but the addition of accountability to the lament as we face the difficult truth that the white supremacist that committed this heinous crime was also a member of an ELCA church. As we struggle with this, those of us that are white must also confess that we are utterly dependent upon the grace of the victims of this crime and all of our siblings of color for our learning and foundation for change. The unfairness of this burden, on top of the 400 years of mistreatment at the hands of institutionalized racism, is simply unspeakable. Lament and accountability, grief and hope. These are the components of the crucible of transformation we find ourselves in today. And now, Reverend Dr. Don Eisenhower will bring us to a time of centering.
Hello, friends. It is such a privilege to be here with you. And I am so glad that you are here today. This hour is of utmost importance. You know, we are all people of grace. We are people of hope. And we bring forth that hope in some of the most difficult, painful times. What an amazing privilege it is to do that, isn't it? But in the midst of a crisis, the crisis that we're now in, as Jill just shared with us, it's important that we don't rush to that hope too quickly. Before rushing to hope, there needs to be a time for just sitting in our pain and sadness. A time for embracing our grief. What I like to call befriending our grief. And then to take it even a step further. A time for us to passionately express our grief and sorrow. Which, by the way, is what it means to lament. To passionately express our grief and sorrow. And the purpose of this hour is to hold the space for you to do just that. Don't worry, we'll get to the hope. That's who we are. But it all starts with the time of lamenting. Jill's going to introduce our speaker, who will lead us through this very important time.
Thank you, Don. Judith Roberts, our guest speaker today, is the ELCA Director for Racial Justice Ministries. Judith reminds us that Our ELCA baptismal covenant calls us to serve all people, following the example of Jesus, and strive for justice and peace in all the earth. She acknowledges that confronting racism isn't easy, and at the same time, this church has shown up for racial justice. Judith reminds us that we have marched together for Black Lives Matter. We've stood shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with our Muslim neighbors. We've accompanied migrant minors at the southern border. We've condemned white supremacy and declared ourselves a sanctuary denomination. We have been here before. Now, let's do it again. Judith, thank you for these words, and we're looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you. Can everyone see my screen okay? Very good. So, this has been, of course, a very heavy day, and I see some folks have already indicated that in the chat box. And so I really appreciate having just this container of this space for us to really have some emotional conversations that hopefully will lead us to spiritual transformation.
Judith?
Yes.
Sorry, real fast. We're seeing your email. Is that what you're intending?
No, you're not seeing my, hold on, let me see. Sorry, let's do this one, hold on. Can you see that?
It says out, it's your outbox or inbox. There you go. That's it right there. Okay.
You have the right one now?
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Oops, let me go back. So as we enter into this conversation period today, I'm not going to be presenting you with any content. We have plenty of content. This is about us coming together as community and having some conversation and time for reflection. And so I have a list of covenant group norms that I would just like to lift up for our time of discussion, because you will be moving into your breakout rooms and having some opportunity to pair and share in that space. And so I just invite us into a time of being fully present. I know there's much activity going on around us. Maybe we're processing something that we heard today through worship. Maybe we're thinking about what's next in our day. But let's just slow down. Let's slow down and be fully present in our bodies, fully present in however we're feeling, fully present with each other. And in our moments of being fully present, we may say or offend or share something that may cause another pain. And if you are on the receiving end of an offensive statement, because this is a brave space, we can say, ouch. What I heard you say, it hit me a little bit differently. I'm feeling a certain kind of way. So let's agree to be responsible and accountable. That if someone says something, let's speak up in the moment or find the moment in between breath and pause and conversation and just say, ouch, that kind of hurt, that stung. And if you're the person who stepped on another's toes or appeared to be insensitive in that moment, just say, oops. Just offer up forgiveness. Oops, I apologize. So ouch and oops help us to be honest with each other, help us to be transparent with how we're feeling with each other, and helps us to be accountable. And then even in the spirit of ouch and oops, that, we are grace-filled people, and let's assume that we come to this space with best intentions, to be our most authentic selves, to be vulnerable, and that we come and we speak from a place of love. And if I was able to hear and see all of you, I would ask for you to agree to our covenant group norms. But I just want us to hold that just for a moment. Just hold these words in our hearts. Let them guide us in our time in this space together, trusting that the Holy Spirit knows how to carry us through all of this. So the intention for today is it's okay to sit with discomfort. You know, some of us want to rush to do something and rush to pick up actions, and we're dealing with COVID-19, but we're also dealing with police brutality. We're dealing with images and constant rotation of death and violence against Black bodies. And one of the challenges with whiteness is this rush to we've got to respond and do something kind of mentality. That has been the church's reaction in this time of death and crisis. And I'm going to challenge us today that it's okay to sit with discomfort. It's okay to turn inward and to write about yourself. And it's okay that we get honest about white identity in this country, in this church, in anti-Blackness. So let's just take that in for a second. Let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable and not feeling to rush and to get more answers and to put another task in front of us. Let's just sit with that for a moment. While you're sitting, I invite you just to breathe that in for a moment with some silence. Feel yourself softening into your chair. Adjust yourself if you need to. One more deep breath in together. One more. One more. I come to this work, I come into this season of grief and lament and thinking about the Mother Emanuel 9. Several of us that are on this call today. I see Bishop Strickland with us. We're either present. I was with Bishop Eaton at Reverend Clemente Pinckney's funeral service, or have personal connection, such as Bishop Strickland, to the 9 martyrs. So there's this trauma that people of color, Black, indigenous people of color, that we have to constantly deal with historic trauma, historic experiences. And they don't just shed and leave our bodies. We're constantly re-traumatized. And this trauma goes from generation to generation to generation. It's a perpetual cycle of pain. What happened at Mother Emanuel was not an isolated event. Many of you on this call may remember the 4 little girls that were killed during a Sunday school service because of a bomb that ignited. Trauma, historic trauma, and this residue this open wound. What we heard today in the service, all of the names that were called, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, just to name a few. This is trauma. Conversations like this and the work that we're called to tend to and do for people of color. We carry it in our bodies. We carry it in our hearts. We carry it in our spirits. This is heavy. And there is not one person of color that I have encountered who is not constantly processing grief, depression, hurt, confusion, frustration. Amidst a pandemic that has already claimed lives, more trauma because of racism, now we're reminded that Black bodies in America are not free to roam and live life as they please, that Black bodies are considered guilty, suspicious, violent, and at any time, young men, women, people of color can encounter a situation that becomes deadly for them. Trauma. And for those who have white skin in this game, white supremacy is focused on solving problems. That if it skips the emotional work, somehow we can speed past and get on the other side to implement, to do. But we're having these two very different experiences. Bishop Eaton talked about the parallel experience of living in America, the context in which we've been shaped, and the reality in which we live. One side that experiences deep oppression, sometimes in the form of actual violence, sometimes in the form of systemic racism, which is still violence, it's just a slower death. And if you happen to have white skin in this country, to not have to think about life in those same terms. So when we come together into spaces like this, we're coming in with a lot of different challenges. I don't want to say baggage, a lot of different wounding. And the reality is that white supremacy, the ideology of a white supremacy, that also wounds too, in a different way. Not an equal kind of wounding, but a disconnecting. And that's that mask of the white supremacy piece of not having to deal with the emotional heaviness, not having that kind of engagement and accountability. So let us take that in for a second. Let us just sit with that for a moment. So I've given you two pieces of experience that many Americans in this country are simultaneously having. Same time. There are those that don't believe that Black Lives Matter? Or why do we even have to say Black Lives Matter? Or don't even see Black lives as mattering? And we've got people on the front line continuing to advocate, see us, feel our pain. So in this moment, I want you to notice your body. Just notice what's coming up for you in your physical being. Just pay attention to it. Start from the top of your head to the soles of your feet. Is there a place that's hurting? Then I want you to notice your breathing. Do you feel like you can't catch your breath? For me, I have to pay attention to my body when I do this work because of how I internalize so much. So when I notice in my body, I notice the tension, the stress in my body, my neck, my shoulders, much tighter, much more stress that I know I'm carrying. And as important as this work is, we have to make sure we are caring for ourselves. And it's much easier to tap into our emotional experiences when we first start with tapping into our physical experiences. So I'm going to invite us to move into some time of pairing and sharing. And Jill, if you would get ready to move people into rooms, into some space, we may have to. And if you don't feel comfortable maybe going to a space, maybe you can just stay here in the main room. But I'm going to invite you to move into a space and to have some one-on-one conversation where you name the emotions that are coming up for you. How are you feeling? So Jill, will you please move everyone in? And you'll each have 2 minutes. Each participant will have 2 minutes to share just how you're feeling, and then we'll come back together.
Welcome back to the main room. Judith has some additional framing for us as we go into our next breakout session. Judith.
Thank you. I just wanted to say amen to what Sister Felicia Campbell was just sharing with us. We heard the end of her comments about love. Thank you. I hope everyone had a chance to share your, excuse me, hold on, my screen jumped in advance. I hope everyone had a chance to share with your partner just how you are feeling in this time, in this space. I appreciate my conversational partner, Karen, for joining me. And I wish we had more time for all of us to kind of open up and to share, but I can only imagine there's probably a whole host of experiences and emotions that are coming up. In our conversation, anger was one of the topics that came up. And I was sharing that, one of the challenges with our culture, with the predominant culture that we live in, is, not being able to really express all of those feelings. And anger is just the opportunity to kind of express something deeper from our heart. It's a breaking open of some experience. And so it's okay to have anger. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to want to weep. So naming how we're feeling is so vital and important in this work. I'm going to move us forward because I want you to take a moment and grab a pen and paper, use your computer, and I want you to write. I want you to write about your reaction to what we have seen. We have seen so many images, so many videos and different information that has exposed racial violence in our culture. We've seen Mr. Floyd, we've seen Montgomery, we've witnessed this collectively together. So I just want you to grab a pen and paper for the next few minutes. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes just to write on your own. When you think about all of these images, what is coming up for you? And I need you to be descriptive. And it might be time. So I'll try to watch the time for us. And maybe just scribbling down some of your thoughts, shouting out anything that services for you. And we're going to come back together again. You can turn your camera off if you like.
Judith, I had difficulty hearing. There was some breakout. Are you ready for us to move to breakout rooms with this particular? No. Okay. Thank you.
They're just writing independently. Everyone is going to write just for a couple of minutes by themselves first. Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Oh, no worries. No, thank you. I'll give you 1 more minute just to write to yourselves. Just a few more seconds, 30 seconds. Okay. So Jill, what I would like to do is instead of moving us into a sharing with our groups for this one activity, if we could just get maybe popcorn. Is there 1 or 2 people who would be willing just to share what is coming up for them when they think about what we've experienced collectively together? What did you write? And if you just raise your hand, I can call on you. Okay, is that Sue? Sue Best? If we could unmute Sue. Yes.
Oh. Greetings, Judith. Thank you so much for leading us. I wrote about George Floyd. I felt angry. I felt helpless. I wondered if I had been there at that moment, what would I have done? My hope is that I would have been outraged and try to gather some people to overcome the police. To hear a man speaking for his mother and saying, I can't breathe, I just have so much anger towards that police officer. I thought, what an arrogant ass. And pardon my, I'm sorry. I've apologized to my bishop for swearing. But would I be willing to risk my own life for the life of someone else? And I hope that my answer would be yes, that I was taught to help care for others. And I hope I feel love for George, this human, humble servant who, like me, was less than perfect, but didn't deserve to die.
Amen. Thank you, Sue. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else like to offer up? Yes, Lutheran Restoring Creation. I don't have the name.
I know, I'm sorry, I didn't write it. My name is Phoebe Morad. Hi, and thank you, Judith. I didn't write any prose, but the image that immediately comes to mind is our tornado. Whenever I've seen on the news images of tornadoes, they seem so far away and foreign, like they'd never reach me. And then there was a time that I visited friends in Mississippi, and they showed me destruction of the tornado's path that had just gone through their community. And what really blew my mind away with that was how there could be complete destruction on one side of the road and nothing touched on the other side of the road. And this idea too of a tornado being so all-consuming, but that so many of us don't have any idea other than an image on a little screen as to what that feeling is like. And then to see the aftermath of what it can do and take away from so many people. You have people on the other side of the street might have every single blade of grass just fine. That's what came to me.
It's a powerful, very powerful sharing and images. And I appreciate your vulnerability. And that's what this container we've got today, really this short window of time we have, less than an hour together, is really getting vulnerable and really understanding how all of this is sitting in us. So I really appreciate your offerings. We only have a few minutes left together with me before we transition to our last activity, but I have one more piece for us to work on together, okay? And this is just something we can do together. We won't go into breakout rooms just because of the amount of time. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So, as you know, part of the conversation, this uprooting white supremacy, you know, it's spiritual and it's emotional work. We heard about this evil, even in the worship service, naming that we fight against powers and principalities, and it's not against the flesh, right? So I say that this is work for all of us. We all have to counter white supremacy in ourselves and in our lives, in our church, our communities, because it certainly has infected every aspect of our society and our life together. So I want us to think in the next few minutes about kind of healing. We know trauma exists. We know that we are dealing with some realities, seeing it on video over and over and over again. And I want us to think in the next few minutes together, what can healing look and feel like for all of us to show up in multiracial spaces, in working for justice, in some grounding ways. So just take a few moments just to think about this question. What do we need? What will healing look like or feel like if we're going to work multiracially for social justice? What is that going to look like? And I'm going to invite folks, I'm going to invite you to share openly in our group. And you can also send me a message in chat if you don't feel like sharing more widely with the group. But take a moment, jot down a couple of ideas, and then we'll come back together and just kind of process this last piece. So I'll give you about 45 seconds just to kind of come up with some ideas, and we can do this work together. What can healing look like and feel like for all of us to show up in multiracial spaces, working for social movement in more effective ways? What's it going to take? Give you like 15 more seconds. Okay, let's see. I've got one message here. All right, and we'll open up for conversation, but I just want to read what is showing up in case folks are not following the chat box. To have true conversations in which we embrace the harm white privilege imposes, much more listening on my part than talking, acknowledging and assisting one another in the healing process after major surgery to remove the abnormality, owning our own racism. A lot of oops and outs, a lot of ouch and oops, excuse me. Yeah, very good. Rethinking how we fund and support actions in our own churches. Exactly, some equity work. So it seems like we've got some ideas that we've generated about what it's going to take to move this work forward. And I want to leave us with just, how do we begin to ritualize this? How do we begin to take all of this, getting in touch with our emotions and moving towards rituals of self-care to do this work? Because we know this has harmed us. We know how we've been hurt and caused hurt and harm. And so we need some rituals of self-care. And I'm just lifting this up from my own experience. I certainly have had to find some ways for me to be more vulnerable. For me to find communities to have these discussions and conversations with other people. And sometimes that's just joining with people of color. So we need some rituals of self-care. And I thank you so much for beginning this conversation in the short window of time with me. And I would like to just thank you once again for your participation. And we're not done with this session. So we're going to now move to Reverend Solveig Nilsen, and she's going to lead us into the next session. Thank you, Pastor Solveig.
Thank you, Judith. So grateful for the graciousness with which you have held this space. Graciousness, so grateful. The space where white folks can begin to do this important work, the work that we need to do. So as you mentioned, rituals, I bring, as I close, words of lament and challenge and hope, especially for my fellow white Christians on this call. But maybe in here there's an offering of an image of holding ritual space in creating our own gardens of Gethsemane. And that will make some sense as I share this last piece. So I share these words from the Gospel of Matthew, the 26th chapter. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Stay here while I go over there and pray." And Jesus took along Peter, James, and John and started to feel grief and anguish. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Please stay here and stay awake with me." Jesus went on a little further and fell prostrate in prayer. "Abba, if it is possible, let this cup pass me by. But not what I want, what you want." When Jesus returned to the disciples, he found them asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you stay awake with me even for an hour? Be on guard and pray that you may not undergo trial. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." And withdrawing a second time, Jesus prayed, "Abba, if this cup cannot pass me by without my drinking it, your will be done." Once more, Jesus returned and found the disciples asleep. They could not keep their eyes open. Jesus left them again, withdrew somewhat, and prayed for a third time, saying the same words as before. Finally, Jesus returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping? Still taking your rest? The hour is upon us. The chosen one is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let us be on our way. Look, my betrayer is here." Dear fellow white Christians, the hour is upon us. It is time to wake up. The voice of Jesus is crying out to us through our Black, brown, and indigenous siblings of color. Are you still asleep? We have been in grief and anguish, betrayed, enslaved, tortured, starved, diseased, robbed, jailed, lynched, raped, murdered, disappeared, terrorized over and over and over again on this land to this very day. Please wake up. Dear fellow white Christians, the hour is upon us to heed these words of Jesus, to get up and go to the garden. Go to the garden and let the anguish of Black lives pierce our souls. Go to the garden and fall prostrate on the ground in grief for what has been done and for what has been left undone. Go to the garden and wrestle with the painful truth that the betrayer is here and the betrayer is us. It is time to go to the garden. Go to the garden and confess that we have been asleep while Black lives have been crucified. Go to the garden and confess our complicity in systems that betray the very values we claim to profess. Go to the garden and confess that our spirits may have been willing, but our bodies have been weak, unable to stand in solidarity without being lulled back to sleep by the comforts of privilege. Dear fellow white Christians, the hour is upon us. And it is time to go to the garden and confess how scared we really are and how defensive we can be, how ashamed we feel and how desperately we do not want to drink this cup, how ignorant we have been, and how unprepared we feel to meet this moment. But I tell you this, the Holy Spirit is not concerned about whether we are prepared or not. The hour is upon us. It is time to wake up, to get up and go to the garden. Go to the garden and surrender with Jesus. Go to the garden and pray to the God of creation and liberation. Not my will, but your will be done. Go to the garden and pray to the Spirit of truth and justice, not what I want, but what you want. Go to the garden and say to the power of love through which all things are possible, I surrender my life and my privilege, my strengths and my weaknesses, my fears and my fragility. I place my entire life into your hands, no matter the cost, so that your will of justice and mercy and life abundant may be fulfilled for every single beloved child of God, no exceptions. Dear fellow white Christians, the hour is upon us. It is time to wake up. Get up. Let us be on our way. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Solveig. Thank you for helping to stir us to a great awakening. Thank you all for participating in this very important work. I especially want to thank Judith for the gift she has offered us, the gift of the work that we must do, and helping to spark this awakening. I encourage us to let the gift of what has been shared this day to sit in our hearts and continue to shape us as we move through the time ahead. Please join us next week, where we will continue our work as we invite Dr. Martin Lorman back to our gathering. We will look at how the Lutheran Church has connected and contributed to the problem and attempted healing of racism in our country, using the documentary film, A Time for Burning, as a lens. We'll see you next week. Thank you again, everyone. God bless.